She had publicly called him the most arrogant man in American business, and he had framed the article. What neither of them expected was that the only person either of them had ever met who was completely impossible to walk away from was each other. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're tuned in and ready to dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So, let's get started. The article came out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, it had been shared 40,000 times, picked up by 3 major financial publications, and quoted on the floor of a panel discussion at the Harvard Business School, where someone with a microphone read the headline aloud and the room responded with the particular delight of people who spend their professional lives in the vicinity of power and enjoy watching it get punctured. The headline was, "Ruthless, Reckless, and Completely Unchecked. How Cole Whitfield is Breaking Every Rule American Business Thought It Had Left." The byline was Sloan Mackenzie. Cole Whitfield read it at 6:45 in the morning in the back of his car on the way from his Nashville estate to the downtown offices of Whitfield Industries, and he read it the way he read everything, completely, carefully, without expression. And when he finished, he set his phone face down on the leather seat and looked out the window at Nashville waking up around him, the Cumberland River catching the early light, the city doing its unhurried morning thing. Then he picked the phone back up and read it again. It was, he had to admit, extraordinarily well written. Sloan Mackenzie had a way with a sentence that made each one feel like a door closing behind you. Clean, final, no way back through. She'd gotten her facts right, which he respected even as it infuriated him. She'd sourced 3 former employees, 2 industry analysts, and 1 anonymous board member who had described his management style as a Category 5 hurricane with a spreadsheet. She'd characterized his acquisition of Hargrove Media as less a merger and more a hostile annexation carried out with the cheerful aggression of someone who has never once been told the word no and metabolized it. She'd also, in the piece's final paragraph, called him the most compelling argument for antitrust regulation since Standard Oil. Brilliant, probably, but brilliance in the service of nothing larger than itself is just expensive noise. He had, in fact, framed that paragraph. He wasn't sure yet if that was because it enraged him or because it was the most interesting thing anyone had written about him in 4 years. Possibly both. With Sloan Mackenzie, he'd found, it was usually both. He knew who she was. Of course he did. You didn't spend 5 years building one of the largest private conglomerates in the American South without developing a thorough understanding of who was watching you and what they were saying. Sloan Mackenzie was 30 years old, the youngest senior correspondent at the American Business Review, a graduate of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, and the author of 4 major investigative pieces in the last 3 years that had, between them, triggered 2 congressional inquiries, 1 SEC investigation, and the resignation of a sitting board chairman at a Fortune 500 company. She was also, based on the 1 photograph he'd seen of her, at a journalism awards dinner in Chicago, slightly blurred, laughing at something off camera with her head thrown back and her dark hair catching the light. Completely and inconveniently beautiful, which he noted the way you note weather, as a fact about the world that will need to be accounted for. His phone rang. It was his head of communications, Derek Voss, whose voice had the particular quality of someone who has been awake since 4 a.m. managing a situation. "You've seen it," Derek said. "I've seen it. We have 3 options. Ignore it, which lets it define the narrative. Issue a formal response, which elevates it. Or," Derek paused, "you request a follow-up interview, a right of reply. Let us shape the second story." Cole looked out the window. They were crossing the bridge now, the river wide and silver below them. "Set up the interview," he said. "You want to sit down with the woman who just compared you to Standard Oil?" "I want to sit down with the only journalist in 4 years who did her homework," Cole said. "Set it up." He hung up. The car moved through Nashville. He thought about a final paragraph and the quality of the argument in it. Precise, principled, unafraid, and felt something he didn't experience often and therefore recognized immediately when it arrived. Genuine interest. Sloan Mackenzie heard about the interview request at 9:15 a.m. while she was in the middle of her second coffee and a conversation with her editor, Patrick Osei, at the ABR's offices in Midtown Manhattan. Patrick slid his phone across the desk to her. She read the email. She read it again. "He wants a follow-up," she said. "His communications team reached out this morning," Patrick said. "Full access. 2 hours. Nashville at his offices. Date to be confirmed. Sloane set the phone down. She had a particular expression she wore when something surprised her. Not quite a frown, not quite a smile. A kind of focused stillness that her colleagues had learned meant her brain was running at a speed her face was trying not to reveal. She'd written about Cole Whitfield for 3 months before the piece ran. She'd read every public filing, every acquisition document, every earnings call transcript and shareholder letter going back to when he'd taken over Whitfield Industries at 29 after his uncle, the previous CEO, had retired under circumstances that were described publicly as health reasons and privately, by everyone in the industry as Cole Whitfield. She'd spoken to people who admired him, and there were many, she was honest about that, and people who'd been on the receiving end of his acquisitions and described the experience in terms usually reserved for natural disasters. She'd built the most accurate portrait she could of a man who was, by any objective measure, extraordinary at what he did and almost entirely uninterested in what it cost. She had not, in 3 months of research, spoken to him directly. She had, however, been in the same room with him once, a conference in Seattle 18 months ago, a panel on economic development in the American South. He'd been on the panel. She'd been in the audience, working a different story, not yet assigned to him. He'd answered a question about labor practices with the kind of dismissive precision that made her grip her pen tighter. She'd asked a follow-up from the audience. Not planned, just reflexive, the journalist's instinct kicking in, and he'd looked at her across the room with those sharp, dark eyes and said, "That's a good question that deserves a better room than this one," which was simultaneously a compliment and a deflection and had irritated her for approximately 6 weeks afterward. She remembered his face when he'd said it. The complete, settled self-possession of it. The slight edge of something that could have been amusement if it had allowed itself to go all the way. She picked up Patrick's phone and slid it back across the desk. "Tell them yes," she said. "But I set the terms. My questions, my structure. No pre-approval of copy." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll agree to that?" "I think," she said, picking up her coffee, "that a man who framed my article is not looking for a press release. He wants the real conversation." She paused. "So do I." Patrick looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has edited Sloane Mackenzie for 3 years and has learned to identify when she is walking toward something that is going to either be her best work or her most complicated situation, and cannot yet tell which. "Be careful," he said. "I'm always careful," she said. "You're always thorough," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." She gave him a look that said she'd heard him and intended to think about it later, and went back to her desk and pulled up everything she hadn't yet used in the original piece. The material she'd set aside because it hadn't fit the argument, the details that were more human than the story required. She read it now with different attention. Cole Whitfield, 34 years old. Born in Knoxville, Tennessee, to a schoolteacher mother and a father who'd worked in manufacturing until the plant closed when Cole was 12. Full scholarship to Vanderbilt. MBA from Wharton, top of his class. Joined Whitfield Industries, his uncle's firm, where he had no equity and no guarantee at 23, and spent 6 years turning a regional holding company into something that made people in New York and Chicago sit up and pay attention. There was one detail she'd never used. A small one, a footnote in a philanthropy database she'd checked for completeness. Whitfield Industries donated, every year without announcement or press release, a significant sum to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students in Appalachian, Tennessee. No press release. No naming rights. No gala. She'd set it aside because it didn't fit the argument she was making. She looked at it now and wondered, for the first time, what argument it was part of. She booked a flight to Nashville for the following Thursday. She told herself it was journalism. She was a very good journalist. She was also, though she didn't examine this closely, someone who had spent 3 months building a portrait of a man and found, at the edges of it, something that didn't quite fit the frame. She wanted to know what it was. They met for the first time, properly on record, face-to-face with full awareness of each other, on a Thursday morning in October, in the top-floor conference room of the Whitfield Industries building in downtown Nashville, with the city laid out below them and a recorder on the table between them like a small, civilized detonator. He was already in the room when she arrived. Standing at the window, she would notice this became a habit, the window standing, the city watching, in a dark suit with no tie, which she registered as a deliberate choice, the slight loosening of formality that was still entirely controlled. He turned when she entered with the unhurried ease she remembered from Seattle, and he looked at her with those dark, focused eyes and said, "Ms. Mackenzie, Mr. Whitfield." They looked at each other across the conference room with the specific attention of two people who have been thinking about this meeting and are now recalibrating the distance between the person they expected and the person actually in the room. He was taller than she remembered. She was more direct than he'd anticipated. She walked to the chair across from his without waiting to be gestured toward it, and set her bag down and pulled out her recorder and her notepad with the efficient ease of someone who has sat across from powerful people so many times that she has entirely stopped being impressed by the rooms. That, he noted, was interesting. "You framed my article," she said. "Not an accusation. Just a fact she was acknowledging." "The final paragraph," he confirmed. "It was the best thing written about me in 4 years. It was a criticism. It was an accurate one," he said. "Those are the only kind worth keeping." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. The recorder sat between them, small red light blinking. "All right," she said, and clicked her pen. "Let's begin. We are just getting started with these two, and we have a feeling you already have opinions. Drop a comment right now. Team Cole or Team Sloan? Who do you think is going to crack first? Tell us below, we want to know everything." Backhand index pointing down. The interview was supposed to last 2 hours. It lasted 4. Not because either of them lost track of time, they were both, in their respective ways, people who accounted for every minute with the particular discipline of those who understand that attention is the most finite resource there is. It lasted 4 hours because somewhere in the middle of the second hour, the interview stopped being an interview. Sloan noticed it first. She was a journalist. Noticing things before they announced themselves was the entire skill. It happened during a question about the Hargrove Media acquisition, the one she'd characterized in the article as a hostile annexation. She'd asked him to walk her through the decision, expecting the standard executive response. Strategic rationale, market positioning, shareholder value. The clean architecture of a man defending a record. Instead, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Hargrove was going under. Not publicly, the filings wouldn't show it for another 18 months, but the debt structure was terminal. 430 employees. 12 regional outlets covering communities that don't have other coverage. Local news, school boards, county elections, the kind of reporting that doesn't make money but makes democracies function. He paused. "I bought it because someone had to, and I had the capital, and I thought I could restructure the debt without gutting the newsroom." Sloan kept her expression level. "You laid off 60 people. 38, he said precisely. All in administrative redundancy. Not one editorial position. I have the documentation if you'd like it." "I would," she said. He nodded at Derek Voss, who was seated quietly near the door, and Derek produced a folder with the efficiency of someone who had been told to have it ready and had taken that instruction seriously. She opened it. She read. The numbers were what he said they were. She looked up. "Why didn't you say this publicly? When the acquisition was announced? When the criticism came?" He looked at her steadily. "Because the communities those outlets serve needed to believe in their local news, not in my PR strategy. The moment I turn a journalism acquisition into a story about my generosity, I've made it about me." Pause. "It's not about me." Sloan set the folder down carefully. She had spent 3 months building an argument about Cole Whitfield. The argument was well-sourced, accurately documented, and captured something real about the way he operated in the world. She was not naive enough to think one counterexample dismantled it. But she was honest enough to sit with what the counterexample meant. "You could have corrected the record," she said. "When my article ran, you could have sent this documentation to any outlet." "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" He leaned back in his chair. The first time he'd shifted position in 2 hours, she noticed, and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the settled self-possession of the conference room. Something slightly less managed. "Because the critique in your piece wasn't wrong," he said. "The Hargrove detail was one tree. Your article was about the forest. And the forest," he paused. "The forest is a fair argument." The room was quiet. Sloane looked at him across the conference table, across the recorder with its small blinking light, across the notepad with her careful questions, across everything she'd prepared, and felt the particular internal shift of a journalist who has gone looking for one story and found a different, more complicated one underneath it. "Off the record," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You're turning the recorder off?" "I'm asking you a question that I don't want sourced," she said. "Off the record means it doesn't leave this room. I don't print it, I don't reference it. I give you my word." She held his gaze. "That's worth something, whether you think so or not." A pause. He reached across the table and clicked the recorder off himself. "Off the record," he said. "Why did you ask for this interview?" she said. "The real reason, not the narrative management answer." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, Nashville moved through its ordinary Thursday. Traffic on Broadway, the river doing its slow southern thing. The city neither knowing nor caring about the conversation happening 40 floors above it. "Because you were the first person in 4 years," he said slowly, "who wrote about me like the work actually mattered. Not the wealth, not the power. The work, what it does, what it costs, what it's for." He paused. Even the criticism was a criticism of the work, not the spectacle of it. Something moved across his face, unguarded, brief. "I wanted to meet the person who thought about it that way." Sloane was quiet. This was not the answer she'd prepared for. She had prepared for spin, for charm, for the sophisticated deflection of a man who had given 1,000 interviews and knew exactly how to use them. She had not prepared for this, for something that landed with the quiet, unmistakable weight of honesty. "Your turn," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "Off the record," he said, with a slight edge of something that was almost amusement. "Why did you take the interview? You had the story. It was running. You didn't need the follow-up." She looked at him. She thought about Patrick's face when she'd said yes. She thought about the philanthropy database and the footnote she hadn't used and the question she'd been carrying for 3 months without fully acknowledging it. "Because there was a detail that didn't fit," she said. "Which detail?" "The scholarship fund," she said. "Appalachian, Tennessee. First-generation students. No press release. No naming rights." Something shifted in his face. A tightening around the eyes. Not defensiveness, but something more personal than that. More private. "How did you find that?" he said. "I'm thorough," she said simply. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My father lost his job when I was 12. Plant closure. Claiborne County, Tennessee. Not a place with a lot of options when the manufacturing leaves." He kept his voice level and informational, but something underneath it was neither of those things. He was a smart man. Genuinely smart. The kind of smart that, in a different zip code, gets you a scholarship and a corner office. A pause. "In our zip code, it got you a second job at a gas station." Sloane didn't move. "I got the scholarship, he didn't," Cole said. "That's the whole story. I got the scholarship and he didn't, and I decided that was a structural problem worth addressing with whatever resources I eventually had." He looked directly at her. "It's not a press release. It's a debt." The conference room held the weight of that for a moment. Then Derek Voss's phone buzzed from his corner of the room, and the moment folded back into the world, and Sloane clicked her recorder back on, and they spent another 90 minutes covering ground that was on the record and useful and good journalism. But the conversation that happened in the middle, the off-the-record 40 minutes, sat between them for the rest of the afternoon like something that had been placed on the table and couldn't quite be put away. Derek ordered lunch at noon without being asked, which Sloane gathered was standard procedure. It arrived without ceremony, sandwiches, good coffee, the kind of working lunch that happens in offices where people are serious about what they're doing and don't need a restaurant to prove it. She hadn't planned to stay for lunch. She had a 4 o'clock flight back to New York. She stayed for lunch. They ate at the conference table with the recorder off and talked. Not for the article, not for any record, just two people in a room after an intense morning finding the edges of whatever this was becoming. He asked about her work. Not her resume, her work. What it felt like to spend months inside someone else's story. What it cost. "You carry it," she said honestly. "Every piece. You spend that much time inside something and it gets inside you too." She paused. "The good journalism does, anyway." The ones that don't cost you anything aren't the ones worth reading. Did mine cost you anything? He asked. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I liked it less when it was just a clean argument. It's more complicated now. Is complicated bad? In journalism, usually, she said. Complicated is harder to communicate. Readers want clean. What do you want? He asked. The question was direct. Not aggressive, not flirtatious, simply the question of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 4 hours, to be direct with this particular person because she seemed to be the kind of person who could handle it. True, she said. I want true, even when true is complicated. He looked at her with that focused, settled attention. Then we might have a problem, he said. Why? Because the true version of me, he said quietly, is considerably more complicated than your article. I'm beginning to understand that, she said. And the true version of your article, he said, is better than the version you published, because you left out the detail that didn't fit. She looked at him steadily. I'll put it in the follow-up. I know you will, he said. And the way he said it, not resigned, not strategic, but with something that functioned like respect and had the warmth of something more, did something small and significant to the architecture of her certainty. She left at 3:30 to make her flight. He walked her to the elevator, not Derek, him personally, which she noted with the journalist's reflex of cataloging the unexpected. At the elevator, she turned. He was a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and she thought about the off-the-record conversation and the scholarship fund and the way he'd said it's a debt, stripped of all performance. Mr. Whitfield, she said. Cole, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, testing the word internally. It was a strong name, unambiguous. The follow-up piece runs in 3 weeks, she said. It'll be fair. Whatever fair looks like when the story is complicated. I wouldn't want it any other way, he said. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she was going to spend the entire flight to New York trying to categorize and failing, because it didn't belong to any category she'd built for him in 3 months of research. It was too open for that. Too undefended. Sloane, he said, just before the doors closed. Her name. First time. No Ms. Mackenzie, no professional framing. Yes, she said. The detail that didn't fit, he said. That's usually where the real story is. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator going down through the floors of his building and thought about that. About details that don't fit and stories that live underneath the argument and the particular danger of a man who turns out to be more honest than you expected. By the time she reached the lobby, she had identified the expression on his face. It was the same one she could feel on her own. She walked out into Nashville's October afternoon, warm and golden, and called Patrick. How was it? He said. Complicated, she said. A pause. That bad? No, she said, watching the city move around her. That good. She hung up and found her car and told herself, with the firm, practiced conviction of a woman who has built a professional life on clarity, that this was journalism. Research, the pursuit of a more accurate story. She believed it completely. For approximately 48 hours. He texted her on a Saturday. Not his communications team. Not Derek. Him, from his personal number, which he had apparently obtained through channels she chose not to investigate too closely, at 10:23 in the morning. There's a piece in today's Times about the Claiborne County School District. Thought you'd find it relevant to the follow-up. CW. She stared at her phone in her Manhattan apartment. Coffee in hand, Saturday morning quiet around her. The city doing its unhurried weekend thing outside her window. He had texted her, personally, about a newspaper article. She read the Times piece. It was relevant. It was also, she was fairly certain, not the primary reason he had texted. She wrote back, read it. Good context. Thank you. 3 minutes passed. You're in New York? I live in New York. I have a meeting there Tuesday. Dinner after? She set her phone down. She picked it up. That would be off the record. I'm aware. Cole. Sloane. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the Saturday morning light coming through her window, the same unhurried quality of light that had been coming through this window for 3 years while she built her career with the focused, principled dedication of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and where she was going. Tuesday, she typed. 7 o'clock. I picked the restaurant. His response came in under a minute. Wouldn't have it any other way. She set the phone down and looked out the window at New York going about its Saturday, and felt, with perfect clarity and absolutely no idea what to do with it, that the story she'd been telling herself about Cole Whitfield had just acquired a detail that didn't fit, and that it was going to be, as he'd said, exactly where the real story was. These two are electric and we are completely here for it, but we need to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Did Cole win you over in this act? Or are you still Team Sloan all the way? Tell us where you stand, the comment section is open. She picked employees only in the West Village. It was a deliberate choice, not a power move exactly, but a statement of territory. This was her city, her neighborhood, her kind of place. Small, warm, the kind of bar-restaurant that had been there long enough to feel like it belonged to the street rather than the other way around. No dress code, no scene. Just good food and better cocktails and the comfortable noise of a Tuesday night in Manhattan doing what Tuesday nights in Manhattan do. She arrived first. Another deliberate choice. She was at a corner table with a glass of water and her notepad. Out of habit, not intention, she told herself. When he walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, which she noted because it told her something. Cole Whitfield, whatever else he was not a man who made people wait. He'd come from his meeting. He was in a dark suit, tie loosened, top button undone. The same controlled dishevelment she'd clocked in Nashville. The slight relaxation of formality that was still entirely intentional. He scanned the room when he entered, found her quickly, and crossed the restaurant with the easy, unhurried authority of a man who moves through every room like he's been there before. He sat. He looked at the notepad. Off the record, he said. She closed it, slid it into her bag. Off the record. They looked at each other across the small table, closer than the Nashville conference room. No recorder between them, no Derek in the corner, just the warm noise of the restaurant and the candlelight doing what candlelight always does, which is make everything feel more consequential than it may or may not actually be. You look different, he said. I'm not working, she said. Is that the difference? Part of it, she said. The waiter came. They ordered, she got the duck, he got a steak. They split a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir that she recommended and he deferred to without making a performance of the deferral, which she noticed. How was your meeting? She asked. Tedious, he said. A potential acquisition in the logistics space. The principal spent 40 minutes telling me why they didn't need my capital and then 40 minutes explaining why they did. He picked up his wine. How was your Tuesday? I filed 2,000 words on a pharmaceutical pricing story and had a disagreement with my editor about the headline. Who won? I did, she said. I always win the headline. I believe that completely, he said, and there was genuine amusement in it, warm, unguarded, the version of him that she'd glimpsed in Nashville and was now sitting directly across from, unmediated by the professional distance of an interview room. It was, she noted with careful internal alarm, considerably more disarming at close range. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the article. Not about Whitfield Industries or Sloan's publication or any of the professional architecture that had brought them to the same city. They talked the way two people talk when they have, through some combination of circumstance and stubbornness, arrived at the rare condition of finding the other person genuinely interesting. She told him about growing up in Portland, Oregon, the daughter of a high school history teacher, and a woman who ran a small independent bookstore that had survived 3 recessions and 1 pandemic through what her mother called aggressive community stubbornness. She told him about choosing journalism at 16 after reading a piece in the Portland Oregonian about a school district water contamination scandal that had been covered up for 3 years, and feeling the specific, clarifying anger of someone who has just understood what information does in the wrong hands and decided to be one of the people who puts it in the right ones. He listened the way she was beginning to understand he listened to everything. With his full attention, no performance of interest, just the real thing. You've always been angry about it, he said. Not a criticism. An observation. About what? Power, he said. The way it distributes. Who gets to hold it and who doesn't. She considered him. Isn't that why you built what you built? He was quiet for a moment. I built it because I was 23 and I had something to prove, and I didn't have the self-awareness yet to ask who I was proving it to. He turned his wine glass slowly. The anger came later, when I had enough of it to see clearly what I'd been building and who it served. And who does it serve? She asked. Mostly me, he said, with a directness that caught her off guard. Still, I'm working on that. She looked at him. The candlelight, the restaurant noise around them. A man across a small table being more honest than any of her research had prepared her for. That's not in any of your shareholder letters, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. Why are you telling me? He looked at her steadily. Because you're off the record, he said. And because... He paused, selecting the word the way she'd watched him select words with precision. I think you're someone who knows what to do with a true thing, even when it's inconvenient. Sloane looked back at him for a long moment. That might be the most complicated compliment I've ever received. You seem like someone who prefers complicated compliments, he said. I prefer accurate ones, she said. Those are the same thing, he said. In my experience. And there it was again, that current between them, the thing that had been present since Seattle 18 months ago and had been building through Nashville and the Saturday text, and now this table in the West Village, steady and undeniable, the particular charge of two people who have found in each other someone who meets them at full capacity. She looked away first, picked up her wine. Cole, she said carefully, I need to say something. Say it. I'm writing a follow-up piece, she said. About you. It runs in 2 weeks. Whatever this is. She gestured slightly, encompassing the table and the wine and the 3 hours and everything underneath them. It can't compromise that. The piece has to be what it is, separate from whatever this conversation is. He nodded. I know. You're not going to argue with me about it? Why would I? He said. I called you because you write the truth. If I wanted someone who'd soften it for personal reasons, I'd have called a different journalist. He held her gaze. Write the piece. Write it exactly as it should be. I'm not asking for anything different. She looked at him. Most people in your position would at least try to negotiate. I'm not most people in my position, he said simply. No, she said quietly. You're really not. The restaurant had thinned around them. The candle had burned lower. Neither of them had noticed either of those things happening. The follow-up piece ran on a Thursday. It was the best thing she'd written in 2 years. Patrick said so when he called her the morning it posted, with the particular warmth of an editor who is proud of something and doesn't want to oversell it. It's nuanced, he said, which in Patrick's vocabulary was the highest possible compliment. The piece kept everything from the original article, the critique of his acquisition strategy, the questions about market concentration, the structural argument about power and accountability. It didn't sand any of those edges. But it also included the Hargrove documentation, the scholarship fund, the off-the-record truth about Claiborne County framed as context without quoting him directly. It painted, in total, a portrait of a man who was genuinely contradictory, not in the evasive way of someone hiding something, but in the honest way of someone who was still in the middle of becoming who he was going to be. Cole Whitfield is not a villain and not a hero, the final paragraph read. He is something more interesting and more demanding than either, a man of enormous capability who is in an active, unresolved argument with himself about what that capability is for. American business needs more of that argument, conducted publicly without resolution. The country tends to prefer its billionaires either demonized or sanctified. Whitfield, to his credit and his frustration, refuses both. He texted her at 7:15 that morning. Final paragraph. She smiled at her phone. You framed it already. Give me 20 minutes. She laughed, out loud, alone in her apartment at 7:15 in the morning, the kind of laugh that catches you by surprise and tells you something about the state of things. She told herself it was professional satisfaction. She was getting worse at telling herself things. 3 weeks after the dinner, he called her. Not a text. A call on a Wednesday evening when she was at her desk finishing a different piece. And she answered without thinking because his name on her screen had somewhere in the last month acquired the quality of something she reached for without deliberating. I'm going to Montana this weekend, he said without preamble. Good evening to you too, she said. Good evening. A pause, the recalibration she'd come to recognize and find, without meaning to, entirely endearing. I have a property outside Missoula. I go when I need to think. The Bitterroot Valley. It's... He stopped, and she could hear him searching for a word, which was unusual enough to make her pay attention. What? She said. Honest, he said finally. It's the most honest place I know. Nothing performs out there. The mountains are just mountains. The river is just a river. She was quiet for a moment. Outside her Manhattan window, the city performed at full volume, sirens and horns and the constant ambient proof of 8 million people living in close proximity. She thought about honest places. She thought about Portland and her mother's bookstore and the particular quality of the Oregon coast in winter when the tourists were gone and it was just the water and the gray sky and the truth of where you were. Why are you telling me? She asked. A pause. Longer than his usual ones. I thought you might want to come, he said. And then, immediately, with the slight self-correction of a man who has said a true thing and is now managing the exposure. There's a story angle, the land conservation initiative we're funding in the valley. It's genuinely newsworthy. You could. Cole, she said. Yes. Stop, she said. Don't put a press release around it. Silence. Are you asking me to come to Montana? She said. Yes, he said. Quiet. Unambiguous. She looked at her unfinished piece. She looked at her Manhattan window. She thought about honest places and mountains that are just mountains. I have a piece due Friday, she said. I'm flying out Saturday morning. I'll need to file by Friday night. I'll have a car at your building at 6 a.m. Saturday, he said. She should have said no. She had 17 good professional reasons to say no and one reason to say yes that she hadn't fully examined because examining it would require acknowledging what it was, and acknowledging what it was would change things in a way that felt simultaneously terrifying and, underneath the terror, exactly right. 6 a.m. is unreasonable, she said. 6:30, he said. Fine, she said. She heard, on his end, the quiet exhale of someone who has been holding their breath without admitting it. Sloan, he said. Yes. Thank you, he said. Just that. No elaboration, no management. Just the words, direct and genuine. Don't thank me yet, she said. I'm bringing my notepad. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said. Montana was everything he'd said and more. The Bitterroot Valley in late October was the kind of beautiful that reorganizes you. Wide open sky above mountains that had been there long before anyone thought to name them. The river running cold and clear through the valley floor. The cottonwoods going gold along the banks. The whole landscape breathing with the unhurried certainty of something that doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. His property was a working ranch, not performatively rustic, just real. A main house built from local timber and stone, modest relative to his Manhattan life, with a porch that looked west toward the Bitterroot Range and a kitchen that smelled like wood smoke and coffee. He'd had it for 4 years, he told her. Bought it because he'd driven through the valley on a detour during a western road trip and pulled over on an instinct he still couldn't entirely explain. You pulled over, she said. They were on the porch, first evening, the mountains going purple in the dusk, 2 cups of coffee between them. I pulled over, he confirmed. Cole Whitfield, who plans everything, pulled over on an instinct. It happens occasionally, he said. I try not to make a habit of it. And yet here we are, she said. He looked at her, sideways in the mountain dusk, with the particular look she'd catalogued and was tired of pretending she didn't watch for. And yet here we are, he said. They spent 2 days in the valley. They walked the river trail in the mornings, their breath visible in the cold air, talking about everything and nothing with the comfortable ease of people who have passed the point of needing to fill silence and are now simply choosing to. They drove into Missoula for dinner Saturday night. A small Italian place on Higgins Avenue where the owner knew Cole by name and brought wine without being asked, and sat for 3 hours over pasta and burrolo, and she told him about the worst piece she'd ever written, a story she'd gotten wrong through overconfidence that had cost a source in ways she still thought about, and he told her about the acquisition he'd walked away from, a healthcare company mid-negotiation when the due diligence revealed labor practices he couldn't fix quickly enough to justify the deal, and how his board had looked at him like he'd malfunctioned. What did you tell them? She asked. I told them we'd find a better deal, he said. Which we did. And the real reason? He looked at her across the burrow. The real reason, he said, is that my mother was a nurse for 30 years. Claiborne County General. She worked double shifts for 22 years, so I could have options she didn't. He paused. I'm not going to profit from the thing that wore her down. Sloane looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant was warm around them, the November dark pressing against the windows, Missoula quiet and real outside. You don't talk about her, she said. Your mother. She's not in any of the profiles. No, he said. She's not. Why? Because she's not a press release either, he said simply. Sloane felt something shift. Deep, tectonic, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself until it's already happened. She thought about the footnote in the philanthropy database, the detail that didn't fit, the question she'd been carrying since October. She understood now what it was part of. She understood, with the clarity of a journalist who has finally located the true center of a story she's been circling for months, exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at a man who did the right thing quietly without audience because the audience wasn't the point. And she was sitting across from him in a restaurant in Missoula, Montana, 2,000 miles from their professional lives, and she was completely, irrevocably, Sloane, he said. She looked up. He was watching her with that open, unguarded expression, the one that had no professional management in it, no distance, no frame. Just the man, looking at her, across a small table in a warm restaurant while the Montana night pressed against the windows. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. What am I doing? You're filing it, he said. In your head, finding where it goes, what it means. Pause. You do it with everything. She opened her mouth, closed it. It's one of the things, he stopped. One of the things what? She said. He looked at her steadily. One of the things I can't stop paying attention to, he said. The way your brain works. The way you look at something until you find the true center of it. Another pause, and this one was different from all the others, less managed, more exposed. I've been watching you do it all weekend, and I need to tell you something before we get back on the plane, and it goes back to being complicated. Her heart was doing something she was not going to editorialize about. Tell me, she said. This isn't the press release version, he said. This is the off-the-record version. The true one. He held her gaze across the table. I haven't been this present with another person in 4 years. Maybe longer. And I know the professional situation, I know the article, I know all the reasons this is complicated. He paused. But I'm 34 years old and I pulled over in the Bitterroot Valley on an instinct I couldn't explain, and I think that's actually how the important things happen. Not planned. Just true. The restaurant was quiet around them. The wine was warm. The mountains were outside in the dark. Just mountains, honest and enormous and completely indifferent to the smallness and the significance of what was happening at a corner table inside. She looked at him for a long moment. Cole, she said. Yes. I'm going to need you to understand something, she said carefully. I don't do things halfway. When I'm in something, I'm in it completely. I don't perform and I don't manage and I don't maintain professional distance once I've decided the distance isn't real. She held his gaze. So if you're telling me what I think you're telling me, I need you to be certain. Because I don't have an off-the-record version of myself that's separate from the rest. It's all the same person. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of long moment that has weight and consequence and the specific quality of something you'll remember the exact texture of years later. I know, he said. That's exactly why I'm telling you. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold and enormous. Inside, something shifted on its axis, quietly, completely, without any possibility of being filed away or managed or turned into a clean argument. She reached across the table. He met her halfway. Okay, we need the comment section right now because that ending just changed everything. Tell us, what moment in this act finally broke down your walls the way Montana broke down theirs? Drop your thoughts below. We are reading every single one and we want to talk about this. The call came on a Monday morning. Sloane was at her desk in the ABR offices, 3 weeks after Montana, working on a completely unrelated piece about federal housing policy, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered on the fourth ring with the distracted half-attention of someone whose brain is still inside a paragraph. Is this Sloane Mackenzie? The voice was male, smooth, calibrated to sound casual while being anything but. Speaking, she said. My name is Richard Holt. I'm the managing editor at the Financial Ledger. A pause designed to land. I think we should talk about Cole Whitfield. She set her pen down. Richard Holt was not nobody. The Financial Ledger was an aggressive, well-funded digital publication that had built its reputation on the kind of financial exposés that drew massive traffic and occasionally drew lawsuits. Holt had been its managing editor for 6 years and had, in that time, developed a reputation for stories that were technically accurate and deliberately brutal, the kind of journalism that used facts as weapons rather than tools. What about him? She said carefully. We're running a piece Thursday, Holt said, about his acquisition strategy in the logistics space, specifically about a series of regulatory filings that suggest Whitfield Industries has been systematically underreporting its market concentration to avoid antitrust review. Pause. We have documentation. Strong documentation. Sloane was very still. We'd like your comment, Holt said pleasantly. Given that you've been the primary journalist covering Whitfield, we thought professional courtesy. Send me what you have, she said. Of course, he said. One other thing, Ms. Mackenzie. His voice shifted barely, but she caught it. Our source also provided some additional context about the nature of your relationship with Whitfield. Another calculated pause. We won't be including it in the piece. We just thought you should know we have it. The line went quiet. Sloane sat at her desk with her phone in her hand, and the Manhattan morning noise coming through the window, and felt the specific, nauseating sensation of someone who has just understood that two separate parts of their life are about to collide at speed. Thank you for the call, she said, in a voice that gave him nothing. She hung up. She sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then she called Patrick. Patrick's office had glass walls, which meant that the 6 people on the editorial floor could see, without hearing, that whatever was happening inside was serious. Sloane sat across from him with her hands flat on the table. A stillness she used when she needed to think clearly, and her body was the only thing she could fully control. Walk me through Montana, Patrick said. Not accusatory, just precise. We were there for a story angle, the Land Conservation Initiative. Sloane. She stopped. Walk me through Montana, he said again gently. She looked at her editor. A man she'd worked with for 3 years, who had published her best work and talked her out of her worst instincts, and never once, in 3 years, given her a reason not to trust him. It became personal, she said. Patrick absorbed this with the stillness of a man who had suspected it and taken no pleasure in being right. How personal? She paused, finding the word. I don't know what the word is yet, but it's real. And it's been real for about 3 weeks. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Does he know about the Ledger piece? Not yet. You need to tell him. I know. And Sloane? Patrick leaned forward, his voice careful and kind and completely serious. You can't cover him anymore. You know that. Whatever comes next, the professional relationship ends here. The follow-up was the last piece. She'd known this was coming. She'd known it since Montana, if she was honest, had felt the professional ground shifting under her feet and had chosen, for the first time in her career, to keep walking anyway, knowing somewhere underneath the choice that it would cost her this. I know, she said. I'm not questioning your integrity, he said. Your work has been clean. But perception matters in this business as much as reality. And if the Ledger is sitting on material about your relationship, they're using it as leverage, she said. They're not going to publish it. It's a message. What kind of message? She looked at her hands on the table. The kind that says, we know you're compromised, so don't come after us when we run our story. Patrick was quiet. Are you compromised? She looked up. My work wasn't, she said. Everything I published was accurate, sourced, and independent. Pause. My heart is a different question. Patrick looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of an editor who loves the journalist across from him and is watching her navigate something for which there is no clean professional protocol because it is irreducibly human. Go talk to him, he said. Before Thursday. She called Cole at noon. He answered on the second ring, which she'd come to understand meant he'd been waiting, that her name on his screen had acquired the same quality for him that his had for her. "Hey," he said. Just that. The word in his voice, warm and unhurried. She closed her eyes for 1 second. "I need to see you," she said. "Today. It's important." Pause short, reading the tone. "I'll come to you. 2 o'clock. "Yes," she said. She spent the 2 hours between the call and his arrival doing what she did when she couldn't control the external. She worked. She pulled the ledger's documentation, which Holt had emailed within the hour, 23 pages of regulatory filings with annotations highlighting what his team characterized as systematic underreporting. She read it with the full attention of someone who knows how to evaluate a document and has every professional reason to be objective. It was, she had to admit, serious material. The annotations were aggressive and some of the conclusions were overstated, but the underlying filings contained genuine discrepancies. Numbers that didn't reconcile cleanly, market share calculations that appeared to exclude certain subsidiaries in ways that would reduce the reported concentration figures. It could be accounting methodology. Could be a legal gray area. Could be something worse. She didn't know. And not knowing, when the person at the center of the question was someone she'd reached across a table toward in a Montana restaurant, was the most uncomfortable professional position she'd ever occupied. He arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. She'd chosen the ABR conference room rather than somewhere personal, a deliberate decision that he read immediately when he walked in, his eyes moving from the table to her face with the focused attention of a man recalibrating. "This is professional," he said, "not a question." "It's both," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She sat across from him. No recorder. No notepad. Just the two of them and the thing she was about to put between them. She told him about Holt's call. She told him about the documentation. She slid the 23 pages across the table and watched his face as he read, looking for what she always looked for in people reading difficult material, the tell between surprise and recognition. He read in silence for 7 minutes. His expression didn't change, which told her less than she needed and more than she expected. When he finished, he set the pages down and looked at her. "You read this," he said. "Thoroughly," she said. And I think some of the ledger's conclusions are overstated," she said carefully. "And I think some of the underlying discrepancies are real and need an explanation." She held his gaze. "I need you to give me one. Not as a source. Not off the record. As the person She stopped. Recalibrated. "As someone who deserves the truth from you." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him, the jaw, the stillness, the interior landscape of a man working through something. "The subsidiary structure," he said finally, "was built by our previous CFO over 6 years. It's legal, our counsel has reviewed it extensively. The methodology for calculating market concentration is consistent with SEC guidance as of 2019. A pause. "It is also, I'll acknowledge, aggressive. It uses the letter of the guidance rather than the spirit. I inherited it and I haven't changed it." "Why not?" "Because changing it would require restating 4 years of filings and triggering a review that would take 18 months and cost the company significant operational capacity." He looked at her directly. "I've been working with our current CFO on a restructuring plan. It's been in development for 8 months. We planned to announce it in Q1. Sloan looked at him. 8 months, she said. "Yes, Cole." She kept her voice level. "That means you've been sitting on a voluntary compliance restructuring for 8 months without disclosure. It's not required to be disclosed until it's finalized." "I know it's not legally required," she said. "I'm not asking about the law. I'm asking about the choice." The room was very quiet. He looked at her, and she saw something move across his face that she hadn't seen before. Not defensiveness, not calculation. Something closer to the expression of a man who has been asked the precise right question at the precise right moment and is not sure he's ready for the answer it requires. "I made a business decision," he said, "to manage the timeline internally before going public." "Yes," she said. "And a man who funds a scholarship program without a press release because the audience isn't the point." She paused. "That man made a choice to manage the timeline. I need to understand why." The silence that followed was the most significant one they'd shared. Longer than Nashville. Longer than Montana. The kind of silence that has a before and an after. Because I was afraid, he said finally. Quiet. Unambiguous. The truest thing he'd said since Missoula. Not of the review. Not of the restatement. Of what it would look like, publicly, to be the billionaire who acknowledged his own structure was built wrong. I've spent 11 years building a reputation for precision. For being right. He stopped. Admitting a structural flaw felt like, he searched. It felt like confirming everything your first article said about me. That the work is in service of nothing larger than itself. The room held that. Sloane looked at him across the table. This man she'd spent months researching and weeks knowing and 3 weeks being honest with in a way she hadn't been honest with anyone in years. She looked at him and felt, simultaneously, two things that pulled in opposite directions. The journalist who recognized a story that was real and mattered and deserved to be told, and the woman who was looking at a person doing the hardest thing there is, telling the truth about their own fear. The ledger runs Thursday, she said. I know. If you announce the restructuring before Thursday, she said slowly, on your terms with full context, the 8-month timeline, the CFO, the Q1 plan, you control the narrative. It's not a scandal. It's a company doing the right thing before it was forced to. He looked at her. You're telling me how to get ahead of a story you can't write anymore. I'm telling you what's true, she said. What you do with it is your decision. Sloane. Cole. Her voice was steady. I'm not your journalist anymore. Patrick took me off your coverage today. Whatever I'm telling you right now, I'm telling you as... She stopped. As the person who reached across a table in Montana. He looked at her for a long, still moment. Then something in him settled. Not collapsed, settled. The way something settles when it has been held in tension for a long time and finally finds the position it was always meant to occupy. I need to call my CFO, he said. Yes, she said. He stood. He picked up the 23 pages and looked at them for one more moment, then set them back down. He looked at her across the conference table, across the professional distance she'd set up and the personal truth that had dismantled it anyway. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask it. When this is done, he said. When the announcement is made and the ledger runs whatever it runs and the professional situation resolves itself, he paused. Are you still? Yes, she said, before he finished the sentence. Because she knew what the end of it was, and the answer was yes, and she was done managing the distance between the question and the truth. He exhaled. One breath, long and quiet, the breath of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has just been told they don't have to carry it alone. Okay, he said. Go call your CFO, she said. He went. She sat alone in the conference room for a long time afterward, her hands flat on the table, the Manhattan afternoon moving outside the windows, and felt the particular complicated wholeness of someone who has held two true things at the same time and not let go of either one. Whitfield Industries issued a press release at 7 a.m. Wednesday morning. It was 3 pages long, meticulously documented, and announced a voluntary compliance restructuring of its subsidiary reporting methodology, effective Q1, developed in partnership with the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant over the preceding 8 months. It included a personal statement from Cole Whitfield that was direct, unsparing, and contained not a single word of spin. The financial ledger ran its piece Thursday as planned. By Thursday afternoon, the dominant narrative was not the ledger's version. It was the story of a company that had gotten ahead of its own problem, voluntarily, transparently, before the story broke. The ledger's piece looked, in comparison, like a swing at a target that had already moved. Richard Holt called Sloane Thursday evening. She let it go to voicemail. She didn't listen to the message. She was in Cole's apartment on Central Park West, on the couch she'd never sat on before, with the city outside the windows and a book in her lap and his voice from the kitchen asking if she wanted tea, and the particular quality of quiet that fills a space when two people have come through something difficult and are now, simply on the other side of it. Tea, she called back. Coming, he said. She looked at the apartment, the books, the abstract art, the view. She noticed, for the first time, that there was a photograph on the bookshelf near the window. Small, framed simply. A woman in scrubs outside a hospital entrance, squinting into bright sunlight, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. His mother. She hadn't been there before. She was certain of it. He came in with 2 mugs and followed her gaze to the photograph. "I put it up last week," he said simply. She looked at him. He looked back. "It's a good photograph," she said. "She takes a bad one on purpose," he said. "She says candid is the only honest kind." Sloane smiled. "She's right." He sat beside her. She took her tea. Outside, New York did what New York does, enormous and indifferent, and somehow, from up here, with the lights coming on across the park and the evening settling in around them, entirely beautiful. "Cole," she said. "Yes. For what it's worth," she said. "The personal statement in the press release was the best writing with your name on it I've ever read." He looked at her sideways, with the almost smile she'd been cataloging since Nashville. "High praise from the competition." "Former competition," she said. "Right," he said. "Former." They sat with their tea in the quiet apartment, the photograph of his mother on the shelf, the city beyond the glass, and the specific warmth of 2 people who have fought their way through something real and found, on the other side of it, something realer still. "We are not okay and we don't want to be." This act delivered everything. Tell us in the comments. What was the moment that completely undid you? The press release? The photograph? The tea? Drop it below, we want every single reaction. November became December without either of them fully noticing. That was how Sloane knew something had genuinely changed. Not because of any single moment, but because of the accumulation of ordinary ones. The Tuesday nights that became a standing thing without being declared. The coffee he learned to make the way she liked it, which she discovered one morning when he handed her a cup without asking and it was exactly right. The drawer in his apartment that appeared, empty and deliberate on a Wednesday, with no comment from either of them, into which she placed a change of clothes and a phone charger and her worn copy of Gilead that she'd been carrying back and forth for 3 weeks. He'd picked up the book one evening and read the first page. Then the second. Then, without saying anything, settled into the corner of the couch and kept going. She watched him read it and felt something she recognized from her mother's bookstore. The specific warmth of watching someone find something that was waiting for them. She took a new assignment in December. Not Whitfield. Patrick had held that line clean, which she respected even when it cost her. And it did cost her because there were stories in the Whitfield orbit that she could see clearly and couldn't touch, and professional discipline of that kind is never entirely painless. But Patrick gave her something better. A long-form investigation into housing development policy across 3 American cities. Nashville, Portland, and Detroit. That would take 6 months and require significant travel and was exactly the kind of work that reminded her why she'd walked into a newsroom at 22 and never walked back out. She told Cole about it over dinner at her Brooklyn apartment. His 3rd visit, now comfortable enough in her space to have opinions about her kitchen organization that she told him were entirely unsolicited. "Nashville," he said when she described the assignment. "Among others," she said. "My city," he said, with a warmth that was entirely unironic and completely undefended. And she thought about a man who had grown up in Knoxville and built something in Nashville and funded scholarships in Appalachian, Tennessee without a press release, and felt the full, complicated affection of someone who has found the true center of another person and decided it is exactly where they want to be. "I might need a source," she said. "I might know some people," he said. "Off the record," she said. "Naturally," he said, and poured her more wine. Christmas found them in Portland. His idea, which surprised her until it didn't, because she'd learned by now that Cole Whitfield's instincts, when he trusted them enough to follow them, were almost always right. He'd asked in early December carefully in the way he asked things that mattered without the press release around them. "Your mother's bookstore," he'd said. "I'd like to see it." She'd looked at him across the Central Park West apartment, with the December light coming gray and clean through the windows, and felt something shift in the deepest register, the particular movement of someone understanding that they are being chosen, specifically and deliberately, by someone who means it. "You'd like to see a small independent bookstore in Portland, Oregon," she'd said. "I'd like to see where you come from," he'd said simply. Her mother, Carol Mackenzie, was 61 years old, had run Mackenzie Books on Northwest 23rd Avenue for 22 years, and was the kind of woman who formed an accurate opinion of a person within 4 minutes of meeting them and never found any subsequent reason to revise it significantly. She met Cole on the morning of Christmas Eve. when Sloane brought him into the bookstore before it opened. The particular magic hour of a bookstore in the morning, all that quiet and possibility, the smell of paper and old wood and the specific warmth of a place that has been loved consistently for decades. Carol looked at him. He looked at the store. Not at Carol first, at the store, the shelves and the handwritten staff recommendation cards and the display table with its careful personal curation. He looked at it the way he looked at things that mattered to him, with full attention. Then he looked at Carol. "The Carver section," he said, noting the arrangement near the poetry wall, "is better organized than any bookstore I've been in, including McNally Jackson." Carol looked at Sloane. Sloane kept her face neutral. Carol looked back at Cole. "My daughter," she said, "has been in this store since she was 4 years old and has never once voluntarily noticed how the Carver section is organized." "She noticed the Marilyn Robinson," Cole said. "She bought a copy of Gilead for 50 cents at a market stall in Manhattan. She's read it twice and it does something different to her each time." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come in the back. I'll make coffee." Sloane exhaled. He followed her mother to the back of the store, ducking slightly under a hanging mobile of paper stars that had been there since 1998, and Sloane stood alone for a moment among the books in the early morning light and felt, completely without complication, without any remaining instinct to manage or editorialize or file it somewhere safe, entirely simply happy. Christmas morning was her parents' house in the hills above the city. A craftsman bungalow with a wide porch and a view of the West Hills going green and gray in the winter rain. Her father, Tom Mackenzie, a retired history teacher with her eyes and her directness, shook Cole's hand on the porch and said, "I read your press release in November." Good writing, which made Cole laugh, a real one, unguarded and full, and Tom Mackenzie's expression said that was the right answer. Her younger brother Daniel drove up from Eugene with his girlfriend and spent 20 minutes interrogating Cole about private equity in the cheerful, relentless way of someone who has decided to like a person and is expressing it through cross-examination. Cole answered every question directly, including the inconvenient ones, and Daniel eventually leaned back in his chair and said okay, yeah, in the tone of a verdict being delivered. Sloane sat at her family's Christmas table. The mismatched chairs and the good dishes and the particular noise of people who have loved each other for a long time without needing to perform it, and watched Cole Whitfield exist inside it. Not performing, not managing, not maintaining the 44-floor distance that had defined him before her. Just present. Completely, genuinely present. Passing the bread when asked and laughing at her father's history jokes and listening to her mother talk about the bookstore's 22nd anniversary event with the full attention of a man who has understood, somewhere in the last 2 months, that presence is not a vulnerability. It is, in fact, the whole point. After dinner, they sat on the porch. Just the two of them. The Portland rain soft and steady beyond the overhang. The city below them in its quiet holiday version. "Your family," he said. "I know," she said. "There," he stopped, finding the word. "Real," she said. "Yes," he said, softly. "Real." She looked at him, his profile in the porch light, the rain beyond, the city below. She thought about a conference room in Nashville and an article that started a war and a detail that didn't fit. She thought about Montana and Missoula and a table in a warm restaurant and reaching across it. She thought about press releases and photographs and the drawer in his apartment with her Gilead in it. She thought about what her mother had said in the kitchen, quietly, while Cole helped her father with dishes. "He looks at you like you're the true center of something, sweetheart. Don't let that be a small thing." "Cole," she said. He turned, looked at her. The full, unguarded version, no professional frame, no managed distance, no 44 floors between him and the world. Just the man, on a rainy porch in Portland, Oregon, looking at her like she was the truest thing he'd found. "I'm not going to write about you anymore," she said. "I know," he said. "But I'm going to keep showing up," she said. "With my notepad and my opinions about your subsidiary structure and my unreasonable attachment to a 50-cent paperback." She held his gaze. "If that's something you want." He reached over and took her hand. Not strategically, not as performance. The simple, human gesture of someone telling the truth with their whole self. "It's everything I want," he said. The rain came down soft on Portland. Inside, her family moved through the warmth of the house. Her mother's voice, her father's laugh, Daniel arguing about something with cheerful conviction. All of it ordinary. All of it because of that entirely extraordinary. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his against hers. The city below them shone in the rain, honest and unhurried, doing what cities do when no one is watching. Simply, quietly, being real. And neither of them had a single thing left to manage. From enemies to this, and we felt every single step of the journey. If the story moved you, if any moment of it landed somewhere that mattered, we want to hear about it in the comments right now. Tell us, what was the line, the scene, the moment that completely got you? And if you know someone who needs a love story today, a real one, a complicated one, an honest one, share this with them. We read every comment, every time, and we are so grateful you're here. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.